Elizabeth Wright, thank you so much for joining the We Rise podcast today. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. I've had the joy of knowing you now through some professional work over the last year and a half, and you always bring such a thoughtful and intentional approach. So I really have been looking forward to our conversation today. Would you introduce yourself so folks have a chance to know a little bit more about you and your story?
Sure. Thank you so much, Christine. I've really enjoyed working with you too, and I appreciate you having me today. I'm Elizabeth Wright. I use she, her pronouns. I live in Knoxville, Tennessee. I've lived in Tennessee my whole life, and my full-time job is at the Highlander Research and Education Center in Newmarket, Tennessee. I'm a communication strategist there. I've been there for about 7 years in different roles. I also am involved in some youth organizing in Knoxville, and I'm a musician. And yeah, I guess that's about it for now.
Awesome. That's great. Tell us a little bit more about what a communication strategist does, and a little bit more about the Highlander Center for background, for folks who might not be familiar.
Yeah. Well, the Highlander Center has been around for almost 90 years. Next year, 2022,
Amazing.
will be our 90th anniversary. We were founded in 1932. And throughout that 9-decade arc, we've always just been supporting movement work in the South and Appalachia. So that looks different depending on what is happening, what issues are facing people in the region. We are a movement school, so we work with grassroots organizers and communities, and we do trainings and workshops and skill building and leadership development. And we're doing a lot more, I think, direct resourcing now, giving grants and funds and support and capacity to groups on the ground, and also connecting issues across geography, across identity, to try to build a power base of people fighting for freedom in our region, and connecting that nationally and globally. So my communications work, I moved over into this role just 2 years ago. So we're kind of building out what that looks like today. I work alongside an amazing digital strategist who holds our social media and virtual kind of communications online, which has been obviously a big part of the shift and transition of that work in the last 18 months. So I work alongside Emma, the digital strategist, but my role is more in, I would say, the kind of longer form content development and trying to stay on top of what people are talking about, how people are talking about the South from outside the region. What are those narratives we need to push back on and challenge? What are the stories that need amplification and need space and support to get those voices out there? And get calls to action out into a larger audience. I also do our newsletter and our website, and sometimes it looks like a little bit of everything.
Yeah, that's awesome. So a lot of different threads that are coming in that you're kind of weaving together in different ways, particularly for your work with Highlander. I do want to ask a little bit more about your music making in a little bit, if that's okay.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
would love to hear just a little bit more in your time at Highlander or in community. What are some of those narratives that you're really trying to lift up and amplify or push back? And how does that work happen with partnership as well?
Yeah. Well, I think it's amazing right now. I feel like there's a lot of evolution happening in this field. I'm learning a lot. I come from a journalism background originally, and then through the world of social change via social work. And so now I feel like I'm really getting to bring those past experiences and passions all together. And there's a large group of like really talented people who are organizing media, recognizing that the power structures that be corporate media, the control of the narrative is shaping how people view their world and view each other and think about what is possible and get information about what's actually happening and what we can do to change it. So I love learning from groups like Media Justice, Press On, reading Scalawag, the amazing Southern publication with Southern movement journalism stories. So there's a lot of this work happening. And I'm trying to draw a lot from that. I think at Highlander in particular, we have been in this region for so long, and we've built so many relationships over 9 decades and have really worked on the ground on just about every issue that's faced our region. And right now in the current political landscape, a lot of resources have not trickled down to our region in the past, both to organizing work and to just the communities who live here. So our co-executive director, Ashley Woodard Henderson, is doing a lot of work to say, her quote is "Fund us like you want us to win." And she's really pushing back on the fact that we are very under-resourced in this region, and that national foundations, donors, et cetera, don't just throw us away and think that we're a lost cause. You can see what's happened, in recent organizing until just this past couple of weeks, as you know, in Virginia, but there's been a lot of pushing there politically. Georgia, we've seen some big strides happening, and we're going to be pushing to see that kind of work on the ground, in Tennessee and in other places in the South. And the organizing history here is so rich. There's just so many stories of resistance and of solutions and of new visionary ways of being that people have developed and fostered out of necessity, often for survival. But that can tell us a lot about the work that we're trying to move towards in the world that we're trying to build. So we try to get those stories out there. Again, I started this role really right before the pandemic hit. So what I had thought I would be doing, sitting with people on the Hill when they come in those rocking chairs, and listening in on their conversations and their strategy conversations, and doing some interviews to get those stories out about here's what's happening and why they came to us and what they learned here and what you need to know now to connect with what's happening in your community. I'm looking forward to being able to do a lot of this work in person and out in the field, hopefully next year. But that's a little bit about, how we're looking at it at Highlander.
Yeah, that's so beautifully said, Elizabeth. Just to continue on that theme a little bit, when you talked earlier about Highlander, so I'll come back to the music making. I have a note on that. When you talked about fighting for freedom and freedom movements over time and narrative work and how people have worked for solutions, how do kind of everyday community members that you work with, how do people feel like they have an opportunity to get engaged in changing the narrative? Particularly when folks are having a hard time maybe putting food on the table, or when they are looking at kind of their everyday needs, how do folks kind of engage in that? And what are some of those stories that you lift up that really help create that broader sense of community and movement? It's such a powerful world movement at the individual and collective level.
Yeah. Well, I think we are building networks and we are active participants in a lot of networks, and networks are a huge way that I've seen, especially in the last 18 months online. Even when people aren't able to come together, the Southern Movement Assembly is an amazing network of movement organizers in the South and the global South who have been doing so much visioning work and also addressing people's, immediate needs. There's so much mutual aid work happening in the region, here in my community in Knoxville, just people going out and realizing like we keep each other safe. We are, our own economies. We can feed each other. We can grow food together. You can teach me, street medic skills, and I can teach you how to repair tents and things like that for the folks who are unhoused, which are facing so many challenges right now in Knoxville, and I'm sure in other places as well. So really people, I think, building those kinds of networks and sharing resources, sharing skills, that's a big way that they're also telling each other their stories. And that's a big thing about what we do at Highlander, popular education. It all starts with people sharing their experiences and creating a space where people feel like there is trust and there is support and there is safety to be vulnerable, to tell your story. And then when you hear other folks' stories, you start to draw out threads and you're like, well, wait a minute, that happened to me too. That same company was in my community and mistreated their workers as well. What did they do about it? And you start to put together those threads of patterns and learn what you can do. And then, again, like you mentioned earlier, trying to make space for people to tell their own stories and not doing that for other people, but you can still draw out those root causes and those kind of bigger narratives when you are in greater communication and networks with people. That's one way. Our solidarity economy work, we have a whole program that's building out a network of folks in the Southeast who are trying to advance solidarity economies. And so understanding that we are living in this current system and there are things we have to do to organize within the system, but also there are other ways of being, and there are other examples from around the world and from here in our own region of people, moving towards worker-owned cooperatives, moving towards more community-owned gardens and farms and food systems. There's just so many examples, and even if it's not, the direct issue that your group's working on or facing, there's still lessons to pull from that.
Yeah, absolutely. So networks, creating safe space, creating threads, people sharing stories, pulling those threads out and connecting them. Can you say a little bit more about what a solidarity economy is? You just gave some great examples, but for folks who might not be familiar with that phrase, how would you define that?
That is a good question. Yeah. So I think, the way that I don't know if I have a one sentence definition.
Sure.
We do have one. It's not right in front of me and
Yeah,
ready to
yeah,
roll off
yeah,
my
yeah.
tongue. But I know
Just
at
in
Highlander,
general.
we recognize that capitalism is a system that is built to the benefit of folks in power, and that structural racism upholds capitalism and power and vice versa, and that these forces work together, and also that the strategies behind prioritizing profit over people's lives and people's well-being also mean that there are strategies to keep us divided, to maintain that system and to maintain that power and oppression. And so you see working class people being divided, around through structural racism, through individualized racism, through narratives that are lies, essentially, so that we're fighting each other and not banding together to change those systems. And so solidarity economies look like more community governance, people being able to work together to be more in control of their own lives and communities and making decisions collectively, looking at more ways for the people who are controlling the means of production to have more ownership over those systems and to have more say about safety in their community, safety in the workplace. It's more of a collective governance model, and people conflate, I guess, economics with politics, and that's another narrative, that like socialism is some kind of blanket way of being, but really it just looks more like putting people over profit, as opposed to capitalism doing the opposite.
Yeah, absolutely. So reclaiming to some degree that sense of ownership, control, localism, production of food, of wealth, of goods in the local community. So a lot of talk about local and narrative. So to bring it back to your own narrative, Elizabeth, you talked a little about music making earlier. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you, what kinds of ways do you make music, and anything else you'd like to share about your work more broadly with Highlander? And then we'll kind of shift a little bit to community and belonging and resilience after that.
Sure. Well, so I come from a family, grew up on my dad's side of the family. My whole family were in a gospel music singing group. All my grandfather and his like 10 and 12 siblings, however many, there were a lot of them, were gospel musicians. So I grew up listening to them playing banjo and guitar in a Baptist church, singing I'll Fly Away, and, funerals and reunions. So I kind of grew up in a musical family, but I never took lessons. I was never taught directly by my grandpa how to do that. But I guess I just, always have been very inclined towards music, listening to music. And so when I was in high school, I got a bass guitar at a yard sale, and I've been playing bass guitar ever since. And I had a lot of friends who were musicians. I kind of just lean in that direction, a lot of rock and roll, garage rock, punk rock, that kind of scene. And I got sick of watching like the boys practice and sitting on the sidelines. So I was like, I'm going to get my own bass and I'm going to do this myself. So I'm just self-taught, and it's a lot of fun. And I've played in several bands in Knoxville over the years and still do today. But at Highlander, cultural organizing is one of our methodologies. And so it's all about, connecting art and culture and music and stories with policy and practice, using that and combined with pushing healing, wellness, and faith and spirit to end up shifting policies and the ways that we, engage with each other and live in our world. And so I think with that influence in the back of my mind from my time at Highlander as an intern way back in the early 2000s, I started with some other people here in Knoxville, Knoxville Girls Rock Camp. It's an international girls rock camp alliance, and it's not just for girls. A lot of the chapters are changing their name now because it is for transgender and non-binary young people as well. But it's basically providing instruments and instrument instruction and space for young people who don't often have access to musical instruments or instruction, or a space where they can just be themselves, to come together and form bands, write songs. It's a very youth-led space, and it's a lot of fun. And that's one way that I guess I kind of connect my music making with some organizing work in community.
Yeah, I love that. How do folks find out about it? And then how do folks, do you find that folks who are participating are shy at first or are hesitant? Like, how do they create their own sense of safety to begin to engage and drop in?
It's amazing. I mean, so we have a kind of umbrella organization that does after school programming, and it's called Know How. And so our website, I think, is just knowhowknox.org, or you can just Google Know How Knoxville. And Knoxville Girls Rock Camp is the program. And yes, it's a 1 week. So we do a camp every summer, and it's 1 week. It's, from like 8 to 5 every day. So it's just like a 40-hour thing. And the first day we have young people come in who have never picked up an instrument before, can't even say their name out loud as we're sitting in the circle to do our introductions in the morning, like hiding. And so, but we do a lot of, we do workshops, we do a lot of just like dance parties. There's like a whole different kind of, I guess, different tools and different ways that we talk to each other and really center the young people. We just make it fun. And then eventually we put them into bands based on, their music preference by the end of the first day. And there's an adult in the room who's like their band coach or whatever, but we're not trying to get them to like play a song perfectly or even know how to play a note. It's like, express yourself, be loud, make noise, take up space. Like that's the thing. And the other young people just support each other. Like we're able to somehow, they create this environment where it's like, you can be yourself. We love you. We're silly. We're loud. We're proud. Get used to it. And there's very little, adult kind of frames put on the space. So it's a very silly, loud, amazing, fun space. And by the end of the week, they have written a song, and these songs are amazing. So you see these young people that were hiding behind their hands at the beginning of the week. On a stage on Saturday at the end of camp, we have a community show that usually has at least 100 people at a real venue on a real stage, really loud. And they performed the song that they just wrote that week.
That's so cool.
And it's the most amazing experience. And all of the adults, we get so much from it too. I really think we haven't been able to do it, in 2020 and in 2021. And I can tell the difference in myself. That I haven't had that kind of space and experience and that, group of support. It's my favorite thing in the world. Honestly.
That's so beautiful. I have goosebumps, Elizabeth. So it's like this, creating this space, and I know the word container is used so much, but it sounds like a magic week of where people can kind of just become the fullest expression of themselves in the way that they want to express themselves. That's so gorgeous. Have you heard from folks what they do the week after, or the month after, or the year after, and how, and even to broaden it out, like how are people, young folks or folks maybe who often do hide behind their hands related to music, or in your work with community and organizing and life, how do people continue to take up space? I love that phrase that you used. And how do people continue to stand in what brings them joy and feeds them after that magic week?
Well, the relationships that they form at camp are like airtight, and they all mostly stay in touch with each other afterwards. We have, a bunch of instruments that have been donated to us, so we can loan them out so that they can practice. Some of the parents have been like, hey, let's keep the band together. You can come practice in our garage, after school every week. When we were able to, we have a space where we can set up, the band equipment, and we've supervised band practices so they can keep going. But also a lot of them have been taken that on themselves and joined the band at their school. And so carried forward, not just the musical part of it, but also like the self-confidence, I think. And there's so many skills that are wrapped up in, learning a new skill, whatever it is, but also like getting in front of people and just speaking into a microphone. Math and science are a big part of music making. A lot of them also have started, clubs and groups at their school. We bring in community organizations to do workshops and talk to them about, sex education, organizing skills from local organizers. We talk about racial justice. We talk about the history of organizing. We talk about young people who've made a difference in their community, because we do see this as a way to for them to express themselves and say what they need to say. Their songs are often, some of them are very silly, but some of them are really speaking to what's going on in their lives and what they're experiencing at school. And we have a teen leader program so that as they get into high school, if they've been coming to camp for a few years, then they end up kind of taking over the curriculum planning and the bigger structure. And we have former campers who now are adults who are coordinators with us,
Yeah.
who I hope will eventually, just run it themselves.
Yeah.
So it's a good cycle.
Yeah, that's awesome. So ways for folks to continue. I love that. So thank you for sharing that story. One of the things, Elizabeth, that I've been really struck by is the number of youth-led groups that you work with, Highlander works with, and the importance of those spaces. And just from my own experience growing up, I know that's been key for spaces, youth-led. Can you talk a little bit more about across the region where you see what's creating a sense of belonging for people across the region, what's creating resilience, whether those are some of the youth-led movements and groups or otherwise? What are you noticing as you look out?
Yeah. I mean, I immediately think about the Stay Together Appalachian Youth Project. They're an amazing group of people who have an advisory committee of young people in Appalachia that are supporting people who often would feel isolated or not feel like they have the resources or the support to be their full selves in this region and to show up and to stay here and have opportunities and feel healthy and well doing that. And they've created a network and a whole infrastructure, of young people in this region who are doing amazing things, both in their communities and region wide. So the Stay Project is a big example to me that I appreciate the work that they're doing. And at Highlander, our program, Seeds of Fire, is the youth organizing, kind of intergenerational organizing program. And this last year, Cal, Lane, and Rosemary Paz are the program managers for that. And they developed two cohorts, a transformative cohort and a methodology cohort. And it's building kind of a smaller network of people, young people who are already organizing in their region. And they do peer learning, peer education. That's been kind of a trend, I guess. The way that you and I met was after Highlander's Appalachian Transition Fellowship Program, which was supporting emerging leaders in Appalachia to build peer networks. And the work that has come out of those kinds of initiatives at Highlander and at other places just blows me away, because again, it's that thing of when you get people in the same room and they have something in common, whether it's geography or, where they live, or if it's the issues that they're facing at home, the relationships that they can build, the things they can learn from each other, and then knowing that they have each other's backs, it's just made for some amazing leaders to come out of this work. And a lot of changes happening in organizations across the region that are being pushed towards doing more work of dismantling white supremacy in their organizations, to implementing more workers' rights in their work, and then in communities as well, shifting policies in local government and that influence state governments and then can shift the region. So I get really excited talking about this, obviously, but the transformative cohort and did a sharing at our Highlander homecoming this year, which was online. So if you look up Highlander Center Vimeo or go on Highlander's website, that was one of the workshops I was really excited to attend. It's about 90 minutes of these young people who went through this learning experience, and they were also given grant funding to advance the work in their region. They're brilliant and they know what is up and they are doing great things, and we all have something to learn from them. So that's a resource I would definitely recommend.
Awesome. We'll
include that to learn more about young people.
We'll include that on the show notes and the website for the episode too. So thanks for lifting that up. So when you think about the projects that inspire you, whether that's the Stay Project or others, and when you think across the region broadly, Elizabeth, where are you seeing kind of these points of, I don't know if resilience is the word you'd use, or movement building, or, building freedom in different ways? What's really inspiring you, and what is really catalyzing the region forward, and what's holding it back? You've already talked about that to some degree, but feel free to take that where you want to.
Yeah. Well, I'll speak to my own community right here in Knoxville, because that's, where I think I see the most. I was mentioning, I think before the recording started, that because of the pandemic and, I'm immunocompromised. And so I have had to stay in and protect myself a little more than some people might have had to, or people who didn't even have a choice, who had to go to work, like my husband, who works in retail. But regardless, I've had the privilege of being able to work at home. And also, the challenge of having health issues that have kept me trying to figure out how to support and be engaged with all that's happened in the last 18 months. So some of this is work that I've seen online or signed, petitions or written letters or given financial support to and not had my hands directly on it. But here in Knoxville, there's the First Aid Collective, Knox, which has been doing a lot of that mutual aid work, a lot of Narcan distribution, a lot of awareness around, testing drugs for fentanyl, making sure that people are able to take care of themselves and protect themselves, get medical support, because as we know, healthcare access is not easy. Mental health access is not something that's at most people's fingertips in our region or here in Knoxville. So there's groups that are, going and getting trained as EMTs and using transferable skills in community to provide those things to each other. There's groups that are going out and supporting, I think, here in Knoxville, our mayor, during the pandemic, we've had a housing crisis, so like has happened across the country and here in the region as well. But we've always had a population of unhoused people that the city has basically just, not really resourced, given any affordable housing, much support at all. Faith-based groups are given the money to run programs, but there are so many restrictions on how people can access those services and what they have to give up to access those services that it's really, really unfortunate and has created a crisis. So we have groups that are going out and helping people when the raids come through to clean out the camps where people are living, trying to protect their possessions, protect their valuables, give some money, give some resources, replace those tents when they're destroyed. So people taking very hands-on direct action to physically protect people and physically resource people. Those who have been able to do that, that's been something I've been excited to see. We've got the Knoxville City Council, City Council movement here in Knoxville has got a lot of folks into local politics and trying to get more people represented in local politics, more Black folks on our city council, more women on our city council, more queer folks involved in local politics. And they've done an amazing job, just at least building out some analysis about why it is important to be engaged, especially on the local level where a lot of those decisions really impact our lives. So the city council movement's been an exciting thing to see. There's just, I think, we're seeing a lot of the work and the groundwork that's been laid for so long. I had started out this conversation talking about the long history of resistance in the South and the solutions that people have built out of necessity and out of survival, and also from cultural traditions, and faith-based traditions that are now, I really think people, those examples and those stories and some of the narratives that have been shaped on the left in a long ways, people in the last year, especially a lot of workers in different industries, were able to kind of start to draw connections to that and say, wait a minute, like we're seeing these things actually playing out in far more extreme ways than I've experienced them before. And we have to do something about it. So analysis is sharpening. The skills are already, people are ready to jump up and share their skills. The strategies are there ready for more folks to grab a hold of and build on. So I'm actually excited. The last 18 months have been so hard for so many people. And of course, we're seeing that pushback, but I may be wrong, but in my mind, it feels like the policies and the conspiracy theories and the extreme fascism and white supremacy organizing that we're seeing feels like, I hope, it's the last dying gasp. The people who have been holding power and they are afraid, and we have made so many strides in movement and we're right there ready to push through. I'm trying to stay focused on the hope and the belief and that vision of knowing that we've come this far, and while we're still in it, it's so hard to see that perspective. But I really hope and believe that we are on the precipice of pushing through that and winning and really experiencing something that's transformative.
That's so beautiful. That moment, that edge, when you look Elizabeth, to the other side, what are you seeing? What is that transformation? What are those strategies, and like, what does that transformed? We've talked about that through our professional work together to some degree. What does that look like to you in terms of community and the everyday, that sense of transformation and coming together?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know. I think maybe what led me into this work was just, this is maybe an airy way of answering this question, or Aries way, because I am an Aries. But I've always struggled within my own body and mind to reconcile that of all the possibilities that humanity had on this planet that we inhabit, at least that's what we know, this is where we are, of all the possible ways that we could have lived together on this earth, how did the people who ended up taking control and creating harm, why was that the way? How did we let this happen? How did we get here? That this, 9 to 5 work grind, everything for $1, destroying our planet and destroying our communities. What have we been? It's just, it's always blown my mind that there were infinite possibilities for our lives on this earth together. We could have shaped our societies in so many different ways.
Yes.
And I think it's hard for all of us because of the way that those systems and structures require us to stay on that wheel, to pay our bills and to keep our credit up and to keep a roof over our heads and to feed ourselves. It's hard to imagine that it doesn't have to be this way. And so, what that could actually look like is sometimes hard to envision, but I think we're seeing the steps that are going to get us there. And I think it does look like making reparations and amends for the people who had this figured out to begin with, and whose land was stolen and whose communities were destroyed because of profit and greed. There's a lot to learn and to give back from our colonial, history and the histories of harm that white people and capitalism have inflicted all over the place. So I think we can't build the world that we want to get to until we can't just recreate the same harms and do the same things in the process of trying to get somewhere else. So to me, it starts with reparations, and centering the power and leadership of the people who've been impacted by this history and today's current iterations of it. And there's a lot of examples from there. There's an infinite possibilities for what it can look like if we're really willing to do the work of being accountable and imagining something new, and giving up, for those of us who are, experience the privilege of white privilege or of gender privilege or of class privilege. I was in it was actually a Highlander workshop, the Elephant in the Room series that our co-executive director, Ashley Woodard Henderson, led, looking at white supremacy and how it shows up in our movements and in our organizations and in our lives. And the question was posed by one of the participants, what does an anti-racist post, racist world look like to white people? Do we have the same vision or idea of what that would even look like or be like? And I've been sitting with that question. I don't have the answer to that, of course, right now, but I've definitely been asking myself that question. Like, what does that look like for those of us who are doing that work? And are we committed to everything it's going to take to get us to a new way of being together? So, like I said, that's the airy answer to that question.
What a beautiful question, and hard question, and one that if we don't create space to sit with and talk about together, it will just be assumed, likely.
Right. Yeah.
So what did folks talk about, any responses to that in that space and in that circle?
Well, I don't know that there was that conversation got, I think that question, people were like, okay, I need to sit with this for a minute. And so, we do some caucusing at Highlander, and our white caucus has been engaging with that and starting to talk about that. So we're still in the beginning stages of trying to to answer that, I think, for ourselves as a small caucusing group that's trying to be accountable and dismantle white supremacy in our own selves and our work together just with Highlander. So
yeah, absolutely. So that sitting with it and that listening and learning often is what's skipped over, and what often, gives an idea, foundation, and legs to stand on and move from. So to broaden out a little bit, Elizabeth, you've talked about some really beautiful work in Knoxville with your professional work. What makes you excited about what's happening in your community? And you can reference something you've already talked about, or just lift something else up if you'd like to.
Well, I think those baby steps that are getting us to those places. There's a lot of, just yesterday I found out that there's a Knoxville construction cooperative of folks who are getting together to, share construction and home repair skills. So there's these ways that are breaking down our dependence on the system and on capitalism and on putting wealth in other people's pockets, but building collective wealth together, which sometimes also does just look like building our skills or our barter system. I was part of a bartering group on Facebook during the pandemic where people would, it was barter only, and you would leave something on someone's porch. And the relationships that I forged with complete strangers who I never actually spoke with face to face because it wasn't safe, through that bartering system was amazing. So even, the smallest steps and practices towards challenging the ways that we've been taught to do things and breaking down those boundaries in our mind that are, keep us cemented in this tunnel vision of this is the way things are and this is the way things always have to be. Anything in that direction, I think, can be transformative and can be the beginning spark, that lights up, the next way forward. So yeah, there's a Knoxville housing cooperative that's pooling resources for people to be able to own homes together. And they again share kind of the repair, upkeep, and maintenance of the properties that they collectively own. We've seen some collective bargaining here in Knoxville at our food cooperative. The workers there unionized. There's a group here in Knoxville called the Service Industry Coalition of Knoxville that popped up in the last year and a half when so many restaurant workers were being forced, to go to work. People weren't wearing masks here in Knoxville. Our county government is very anti-mask, very conspiracy theory oriented, and it's put so many people's lives at risk on the front lines of folks who just are trying to go to work and make money to pay their bills, from what that means for our entire community when you're not disrupting the transmission of a deadly virus. So there's a coalition that's popped up now that's done a lot of fundraising and holding accountable these local companies to treat their employees better and not perpetuate this kind of harm. So there's just a lot, and those are just examples, here where I live in Knoxville, but those are, great examples in other places that people can learn from and replicate. And I think that's what it's all about. And once we're able to create those little pockets of resistance locally, then we start to build, with the county next to us, then we start to build across state lines, and more and more things become possible from there.
Beautiful. That's sparking and building. Yeah, beautiful. Elizabeth, what lessons learned, what key lessons would you share with others who are trying to create change in their communities and regions? You've shared so much goodness already. What else would you share?
Well, one thing I think that I've experienced this year and have been thinking a lot about, well, two things are coming to mind, I guess, right off the top. One of those is disability justice. I think my mom has multiple sclerosis, and it's a pretty extreme rare form of it. And so she's housebound almost every flu season, has to take a lot of precautions in life throughout the year outside of a global pandemic. I mentioned, I'm immunocompromised, and that had put me at a, different risk. And I think for the first, time for myself personally, I started to feel the, I don't know how to put it, like, I guess the disposability, seeing how governments were not prioritizing the public health protections for everyone, but knowing that for a lot of people, this is a something that they experience outside of a global pandemic.
Yeah.
And so
Mm.
even though my family is directly impacted by disabilities and health issues, I also, have received some pushback with the project I did As We Regather, about the phrasing of that phrase. Like, well, not everybody is regathering, and that project changed very much. It was a story gathering project, essentially, that I wanted to hear from other people. I needed to learn from other people. Earlier this spring of 2021, as before the Delta variant arose, there was this big kind of push to get back to normal. People were talking about, it's time to get back. All right, woo! The vaccines are out. We're vaccinated. Let's go back out there and party and act like this never happened. And for me, I was like, well, I have to be a little more cautious than that, especially in the South, where a lot, like I said, in Knoxville, a lot of the Republican, government leaders have not been protecting the public health. Our school board refused to enforce mask mandates here. But also, just after going through, everything that 2020 brought, from the pandemic to the uprising to the insurrection beyond, I was like, we need to hold on, take a minute and process what we have just been through and learn from this. Like, this rush back to normal, this rush to get back to things, to compartmentalize things and pretend they never happened. That's part of the sickness, I think, of capitalism and of white supremacy and white supremacy culture, is to push us in those directions. And so I invited people to share their stories in the last year and had some questions about, what have you been observing? What do we need to know from this moment? What have you seen? Similar to the conversation we've been having here, these are such important conversations for us to have, because everyone has experienced this in different ways and has, grief was a big thing that came up in the course of the conversations, and in my life as well in the last year. We've been through a very traumatic, we are still going through a very traumatic, transformative, collective experience. And so, I was called in from some folks that were like, maybe think about, how you're phrasing this and thinking about this from the perspective of people who are dealing a lot with different kinds of abilities and different kinds of options, inside and outside of a pandemic. So even being someone who experiences that myself, I think that's something for all of us to think about and keep in mind. And maybe, well, another part of that is I think connecting globally. Just this week, the As We Regather project, I had been talking to a group, Equal Health has a program called Campaign Against Racism. It's public health practitioners across the globe who, and especially in the global South, who are working against systemic racism and what that means for public health, healthcare, and health access. And some of their chapters, Uganda, Brazil, Liberia, Spain, Haiti, engaged with some of the prompts from that As We Regather project and shared videos, talking with each other about it. And for me, I think even though we're living here in the US South, we've experienced this pandemic very differently than people, on the coasts or in the Northeast, in different political environments. To think about the vaccine hesitancy and vaccine access, that what it looks like here in our communities, and then to hear from folks in Uganda who are saying less than 1% of people here have even had access to the vaccine. The vaccines that we are getting are leftovers, from Western countries with a short shelf life. One person said, we see the news and everybody's clapping for Biden for donating vaccines to, global, other poorer countries. And we appreciate the aid and support, but what this is really doing, if you look at it from a systemic lens, is it's perpetuating dependency on Western countries. And what we really want the vaccine companies to do is to share their formulas so that we can manufacture these vaccines ourselves here at home. And we've seen Pfizer do that just this week. And now the call is on Moderna to do the same. So msfaccess.org is something just this week that I was looking at. So I think, again, thinking about building networks, building connections, connecting narratives, connecting threads. We do that in our local communities. We do that as a region in the South and Appalachia. but we've got to do better about understanding the global impact and how these systems and structures that have been oppressing us and our communities here are, doing that times 10 and always have been, as we know, but what that looks like today and how can we connect our struggles globally. To me, that's the next frontier, because the pandemic experience showed us that false borders, false boundaries, it showed us how interconnected we are globally.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
and how much we have, again, they're trying to keep us separated and restricted, while continuing to, perpetuate global poverty
Hmm.
and oppression. It's overwhelming to think
Hmm.
about, but we share so many stories. Hearing from folks in Uganda and being like, the things that are in Brazil, the things that they're being told about the vaccine there are the things that I hear AM radio folks telling people in our communities here.
Hmm.
Somebody's telling the same stories for the
Right.
same reasons.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and so we need to be doing that on our side as well.
And then yet something, so simple, but with such profound potential for change and magnitude, sharing a strategy, sharing a tool, sharing a formula to be able to empower that local creation and local empowerment. And it's the stories, it's the strategies, it's the networks, it's hearing different ways of approaching things. I was talking with someone recently about in another podcast conversation with a dear friend and mentor, Frank Dukes, who was talking about, people have just different shared versions of reality and different truths, and creating space for that. But we have to be able to hear each other and hear each other's experience to be able to hold space for both of those. Yeah, so fascinating. So as we get ready to wrap up, Elizabeth, with this really beautiful conversation, one thing I love asking people is, what do you wish someone told you 5 or 10 years ago about the work, about engaging in community, about, how to play a bass guitar a little differently? We'll take that way, whichever way you'd like to.
That's a good question. I think the biggest thing is that I'm someone who is very type A. I don't know. I guess I put a lot of pressure on myself. I feel a need to be going all the time. I am so appreciative of the healing justice practitioners who have been pushing back on that and have been encouraging all of us to kind of take more collective breaths, realize that, this is a marathon, not a sprint, whatever that looks like and means for you. But for me, it's been life-changing. One thing that, I think has changed the way I've been able to take care of myself, I mentioned, I'm immunocompromised. It's an autoimmune disorder that's exacerbated by stress. And I'm someone who has anxiety, and has dealt with like anxiety and depression. And so I feel that connection of like physical and mental wellness in my body in very concrete ways. But I realized at one point that, I always felt like stepping away was not an option. I felt that way at times, especially with everything we've seen going on in the last 4 years, 10 years. In this work and movement work, it can really feel like it never ends, and that there's always something to respond to and to do, and that's true. But a few things I think that are important from that are that when we are building leadership and skills and relationships of trust with other people, we do this at Knoxville Girls Rock Camp all the time. I had one year, I had something come up at the last minute and I wasn't able to be there. And because we had built collective leadership and had built transferable skills, and none of us were holding the reins like, so tightly on any one part of what we were doing, or felt like we were the only ones who could do it, I was able to step away and do what I needed to do in life, because things are always going to come up and happen. And know and trust that, and all the others were like, we've got this, like, you're good, you go do that. Like, we've talked through this, we've planned for this moment, we've built the skills and leadership of each other so that it is shared and we all can hold this so that one person can step away. So building leadership and being able to trust, that in a community, if we've done it the right way, we've got each other's backs. And that has been life-changing for me. I think another thing for me is realizing that if I'm trying to dismantle white supremacy and fight the harms and practice anti-racism, when I am not feeling well, or when I am stressed, or when I am overloaded or overwhelmed, no matter who the coworker is, if I'm coming into a space or coming to work or coming into community with people, and I'm tired, I'm exhausted, I'm not taking care of myself, that's going to impact the people around me. I'm going to
Yeah.
cause harm because I'm going
Yeah.
to snap, or I'm not going to
Yeah.
be able to think clearly about what
Yeah.
people need to think clearly, or I'm not going to have the energy to take on some of the roles. And so, people talk about self-care, but it is community care. If you're really in
Yeah.
community with other people, then, how you show up, we recognize that's going to impact others. So I wish, that these were things, it's about being accountable and, building a matrix of community, so that, it's not just, well, I'm going to step away and y'all got this and you'll see me, I can't handle this right now, I'm leaving. It's not like that. It's a community of accountability. So I think that's something I've learned, and that has been extremely helpful to me. It's an ongoing process. Always got to check in with yourself and with other people about that. But the focus on healing justice and community care is something that really is transformative, and that we have not experienced so much in Western culture. So
that's so beautifully said and centered and important. And we see what happens. I see what happens when we're not mindful of that, and how long it takes to undo the things that
are just perpetuating harm.
Yeah.
And if that's what you're trying not to do, then
it's not happening. So I love this. So Elizabeth, you shared some great links. How can folks learn more about you, learn more about your work and the things that inspire you? What else would you like to share out as we get ready to wrap up today?
Well, I think, like I said, for the Highlander Center, highlandercenter.org, you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. You can sign up for the View from the Hill on our website, highlandercenter.org, to stay on top of, the work that we're doing and the ways that I'm sharing that out with our communities. Know How Knoxville, we've been on hiatus for about 18 months, so there's not a whole lot of new information, but we look forward to getting back to that in Knoxville Girls Rock Camp next year. We're also on social media and have a website. You can look it up. And I think that's the gist of it for me.
That's awesome. Elizabeth, thank you so much for taking the time today for such a beautiful conversation and for your knowledge and wisdom. I greatly appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.